The United States has charged an Indian national in connection to a stunning murder-for-hire plot. The 15-page indictment reads like a movie script. An unnamed Indian government official contacts an alleged Indian drug trafficker to orchestrate the assassination of a Sikh separatist in New York City. That man, in turn, attempts to hire a hitman, and in doing so, tips off American law enforcement. The CBC's Katie Simpson is tracking this story for us in Washington. Katie, I can't believe I just read those words. What happened when the defendant in this case tried to hire that hitman?
Well, let's go back to the month of May when all of this started. According to the indictment, an Indian national by the name of Nikhil Gupta was allegedly hired by an Indian government employee to carry out this assassination plot of a Sikh political activist in New York City in exchange for $100,000. Authorities say Gupta needed assistance and unknowingly reached out to an informant and was eventually put in contact with an undercover agent posing as a hitman. Gupta allegedly shared details about the target's address, his daily routine, and sent along instructions. Now, originally, Gupta allegedly said he wanted this to happen not close to the lead-up to a major political event in the U.S., which, of course, was the visit by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Joe Biden held a state dinner for him at the White House. Now, Gupta was allegedly worried that if anything happened in the immediate lead-up to that, it could lead to protests or cause unwanted attention. And in some of those initial contacts, Gupta allegedly said, finish him, don't take too much time. Authorities continue to engage with Gupta until he was arrested. Gupta traveled to the Czech Republic and he was taken into custody there, and he is now facing 2 charges in this case.
Okay, so the indictment suggests multiple alleged assassination plots tied to an Indian government official, including the one here in Canada of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. What more can you tell me about that?
The incident in New York City is part of this indictment, allegedly is just part of a bigger, broader part. Again, this has not been proven in a court of law, but this is according to the indictment. The indictment makes direct links to the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. It comes up multiple times along with references to other alleged assassination plots. In the indictment, it says, quote, Gupta stated that before the 29th of June, we have to finish 4 jobs, i.e. that after that, 3 in Canada, and there were 4 specific jobs, 1 in the U.S. and 3 in Canada. There are no specific details in the indictment about what those plots may be, but certainly it's raising a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. Nijjar's name comes up multiple times in this indictment, as I mentioned. After the murder took place in British Columbia, Gupta allegedly referenced it in his communications with his contacts. The indictment says, quote, later that evening, just hours after the Nijjar murder, one of the informants said Gupta sent a video clip that showed Nijjar's bloody body slumped in his vehicle. According to the indictment, after the murder, Gupta wasn't concerned about the timeline and then urged his contacts to act. Of course, that did not happen, and he was arrested.
Okay, there's a lot there and a lot of players, but you spoke with the alleged target of this New York plot, Gurpatwant Singh Pannan, I believe. What did he tell you about this?
Well, he is a Sikh activist leader based in New York City. And of course, the indictment references that an individual of that title as the target. It doesn't explicitly name him, but he says he was the target. He didn't seem fazed at all by the threat in his life. We had a conversation earlier this afternoon.
But I'm not going to stop or deter just because the Modi regime has sent hitmen to kill me. I know my life is in danger and they wanted to kill me for running the Assassination Global Khalistan referendum campaign.
He says that he's more motivated than ever after reading the indictment to carry out his work, and that will be the way he pushes forward.
Okay, Katie, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington, D.C. For more on this story, I'm joined here in Ottawa by Ward Elcock. He is a former director of the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service. Mr. Elcock, I mean, this is quite the thing in terms of what was spelled out here. Let's start with the big headline, because this indictment and its allegations, let's say that up front. The indictment suggests there were multiple assassination plots in North America tied to the Indian government, including 3 in Canada. What are your thoughts on these allegations?
I think from the beginning, the accusation about Nijjar, I guess the question in the back of my mind is, have there been others, and will there be others?
It sounds like they intended for there to be others. If you read,
Well, there may already have been. Who knows exactly? Because there are a number of Sikh killings of Sikhs in Canada which have gone unsolved.
Right. So this is obviously an alarming possible consequence of what we're reading about here. But also, if you read this 15-page indictment, there's talk. This man Gupta, who has been charged, is reportedly saying to his contacts, who we now know were working for law enforcement, if you do this one right, there will be more for you. Maybe once every month, every 2 or 3 months. How should we view the Modi government and India with what has unfolded, at least in what the Prime Minister said and what the U.S. court is alleging over the last couple of months?
Well, I think it becomes increasingly clear that the government of India has been running a campaign to eliminate Sikh separatists, or people they regard as Sikh extremists. And the Nijar case clearly indicated that, and clearly the government signaled that it had very strong intelligence from probably a large part from the Americans. Mm-hmm. And this really adds a lot of fuel to the fire. The Americans must have had intelligence that these folks were coming. You don't set up a trap like that overnight. You don't just simply have somebody there who can be a potential assassin kind of on call. So this is obviously a fairly complicated operation the FBI has run.
So the chain of this, there is the individual identified as CC1 in the indictment in India. This is the Indian government official in the indictment who is not named, but it suggests that law enforcement has identified the individual. The indictment describes him as a senior field officer with responsibility in security management and intelligence. What do you read into that?
Actually, I thought the thing that was more interesting in the document was the fact that he is described as a former police officer, mm-hmm. which is actually, if you go back to the individual who's expelled from Canada, he was also a former police officer, but seconded to RAW. So it would suggest that that RAW is indeed using former police officers as part of its operations.
And what is RAW for people who don't know the Indian?
RAW is the Research and Intelligence Wing, which is the Indian Foreign Intelligence Service.
Okay, so you suggest because this plot was foiled in the U.S. while Mr. Nijjar was killed here in Canada, they must have had some sort of intelligence that this was coming. So this individual, CC1, the former police officer, he contacts Mr. Gupta, according to the indictment. This is the person who was charged with this, who then contacts someone he believes can help him get a hitman, who turns out to be a confidential source for law enforcement, who then leads them to the undercover agent. Is that the result of good intelligence, or is that just a bit of luck that the person Mr. Gupta allegedly reached out to had happened to be a confidential source?
It could be luck. Luck does happen, but it sounds to me like a planned operation.
Right, okay. I want to go back to something Katie showed, and this is one of the graphics we put up. This is paragraph 6 of the indictment, and it's something that jumped out at me. It says, later in the evening, just hours after the Nijjar murder, CC1, who is the official in India, sent Gupta, who is the man charged with the killing for hire in New York. He was sent a video clip that showed Nijjar's body slumped in the vehicle. About an hour later, CC1, which is the official in India, sent Gupta the street address of the victim's residence in New York City. So what do you draw from that? Within hours of Hardeep Singh Nijjar being murdered, this official in India is sending pictures of the crime scene to the person he's allegedly hired to murder another Sikh activist in New York City. I mean, how would they get these pictures? What should we draw from that little detail?
Well, it strongly suggests that the folks who carried out the assassination took the pictures and sent proof home. It's frankly what it would suggest to me.
So how do we view what the Prime Minister said in Parliament with details like this there? Do we think this was information that would have been shared with the Canadian government?
That's an interesting question, and I'm not sure we're going to find out the answer to that very quickly. It does sound from the timelines that the Americans were aware of this before they made Canada aware of it, which doesn't entirely surprise me, because this would be a fairly embarrassing issue, and they may have wanted to ensure, maybe they intended to keep the Indians off to use it to try and get the Indians to back off. But then when the Nijjar killing happened, they were forced into a position in which they provided the information to the Canadian government.
The indictment also says that the Indian government official, this CC1 character that we put up there, he made it clear to the people he was allegedly hiring to do this that the target in New York couldn't be killed in the immediate lead up or during planned engagements between high-level U.S. and Indian government officials. Now, we know from June 21 to 23 that Narendra Modi was in Washington, D.C., went there for a state visit to meet with President Joe Biden. The fact that diplomatic concerns and Modi's visit to the White House was factored into this, does that suggest a high level of political involvement in this? What can we draw from this in terms of...
It doesn't necessarily mean a high level of political involvement, but it does indicate that somebody was sufficiently aware of what was happening, that they wanted to make sure that there was no connection or could be no connection between this killing and the Modi visit, that they wanted these things to be separate. But that doesn't mean that the highest levels of the Indian government were aware of the assassination attempt.
Well, they're certainly aware of it now.
Yeah.
I mean, in a response to today's indictment, the Indian government said it's setting up a high-level inquiry to investigate the allegations. Now, Canada's been calling for cooperation on the murder of Mr. Nijjar and to varying levels of frustration and success. I mean, when you look at this, the idea of setting up a high-level inquiry, do you think the United States, do you think Canada can put any faith in a process like that?
One suspects that the Indians will now have to find their way out of a problem. They clearly have been somewhat inept, to say the least, in terms of the actions they've taken. They now have to find their way out. Their way out may be an inquiry which then points the fingers at a bunch of folks who were off the reservation. That's a solution that one could possibly foresee, but it's also possible that they just are going to try and bury it.
So just as a final point, I mean, what would you be watching for next? What do you think Canada, the U.S. can do next at a diplomatic, political, or intelligence level to try to move this to a resolution?
That really depends on the Indians, and it really depends on under how much pressure they feel. I suspect because of the actions today, they feel under considerable pressure. It's a great deal different from having Canada complain to having both Canada and the United States complain, and for the Americans to have launched essentially a prosecution. My guess is that this will force the Indians to do something. What that will actually be is a $64 million question still.
Okay. Ward Elcock, former director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Thanks for your time. Always appreciate it.
Not a pleasure. A pleasure.